Happy to see you all here bright and early on a Thursday morning. And also very excited to be the moderator for this session 2.3 on enhancing regulatory and policy frameworks for power trade. We have an awesome lineup for you this morning to talk about regulatory issues and policy issues associated or in support of power trade. So I just wanted to give you with my 5 minutes here, which they haven't started counting down yet. So I think they have to count down me as well as all the presenters. So I just wanted to give you a little preview of what you're going to hear over the next hour and a half here. So we're going to have several presentations. Dileepa from Sri Lanka will talk about the preparations now underway to develop the electricity interconnection with India, including the global precedents that Sri Lankan regulators considered and the key elements of the proposed regulatory ecosystem for cross-border electricity trade between India and Sri Lanka. Mats Durand will talk about the findings of DNV's review of leading regional grid codes undertaken pursuant to the AIMS-3 Phase 3 study. His review provides useful insights on the way forward for regional grid codes in Southeast Asia. Roble Velasco-Rosenheim will demystify the mechanics, status, and issues associated with attributing the environmental attributes of cross-border renewable power trade. This is a crucial issue for unlocking potential sources of project finance for RE projects across the ASEAN region. Reena Suri will describe the work of the India Smart Grid Forum on digitalization enablers and benefits for grid operators, renewable energy developers, and market development. Stephen Nash will draw from Kungana's global experience regarding design and operation of regional power markets. Although there is no perfect model, Stephen will show the valuable lessons that Southeast Asia can draw as they develop their own regional power trade arrangements. So what I'm hoping that we're going to get out of this session, both the presentations and the panel discussion that follows, is a better understanding of what the minimum set of governance frameworks, policy and regulatory, are needed in Southeast Asia and around the Asia Pacific to enable power trade. Also, what integrated power grid experiences from around the world would be most applicable and replicable in the Asia Pacific region. What technical innovations, such as smart grids and high voltage DC and subsea connectors, would enable accelerated sub-regional and regional interconnection? What cross-border electricity trade scenarios work best for capturing the extra value of renewable energy power flows? And finally, what role can markets play in accelerating power grid integration and increasing RE development? So that's a long list. Obviously, we won't have any conclusions on any of these, but I hope to stimulate some discussion and have the audience take part in that. There'll be space for a Q&A, audience Q&A for the last 15 minutes of the session. So with that, I'm going to begin introducing each of the speakers. So I'm going to go down here and do that. Okay, I've got two microphones, so I'm dangerous here. Okay, bear with me. I need my reading glasses to do this, so here we go. Dileepa Karunaratne is an electrical engineer with over a decade of experience regulating Sri Lanka's electricity sector. He has a BS in electrical engineering from the University of Moratuwa and has completed Association of Chartered Certified Accountants UK qualifications. He is a member of both the IEEE and the Institute of Engineers Sri Lanka. So Dileepa, would you like to take the stage?
Good to go. Well, good morning everyone, and let's start our session with a brief overview of the Sri Lankan case study on cross-border electricity trading and development of regulatory tools pertaining to that. So this interconnection had been in cards for more than 3 decades, but the most recent impetus, as indicated here, is this 2023 joint statement issued by the leaders of both countries. So accessing regional energy markets is one of our main main objective in terms of, at least for Sri Lankans. And the main drivers of the this renewed interest is basically these ambitious renewable energy targets and also the reform process that kicked in recently. So let's have a very brief overview of the international precedents. So when it comes to Europe, it is this European Commission directives that basically governs the cross-border energy trading and non-discriminatory access and consumer protection, other governing principles there. And it is this ACER that plays a pivotal role in market integration. And it basically coordinates all the transmission system operators and developing grid codes and other stuff. And apparently they also have a mandate for to make 70% of the interconnection capacity they have available for cross-border energy trading. That is to increase the utilization factors of the existing infrastructure. And likewise, we have in South African Power Pool, it is an association of regulator, which is called RERA, that basically provides non-binding guidelines to harmonize the national regulations. So we in South Asia also is sort of trying to take a similar approach with our SAFIR, called South Asian Forum of Infrastructure Regulators. So which we believe is a good starting point. And this approach attempts to collectively set some overarching principles while individual national regulators retain their absolute authority. And Central America also has this similar setup under this Marco Treaty. And they have set up the regional regulatory commission and transmission system operator and transmission company. But one might say that it's a bit closer to a European model, but they also operates alongside national markets. So Gulf Energy Corporation is making an even more relaxed approach by providing infrastructure authority, interconnection authority. So the trading basically happens in a decentralized manner through bilateral connections, and the authority, this interconnection authority only facilitates scheduling and settlement. This highly decentralized trading arrangement. So basically what I wanted to show using this slide is the cross-border energy trading comes in all forms and sizes. And it's very important to have an open-minded approach while placing the greatest emphasis on the peculiarities of each region. So that's the beauty of this. And here's another graphical representation that I included, which you can go through later. And this is a brief overview of our reform process and with respect to cross-border energy trading. And according to this proposed framework, NSO has the absolute authority, and cabinet approval is also required. And this Electricity Advisory Council is now proposed to be abolished by the new amendment to the act proposed by the new government. So we are living in interesting times. So this SAFI roadmap is one key document. So it proposes regional integration, and so I was in the SAFIR work group where this was discussed, but I could not find any public version of the document. So I have included this link, which basically elaborates on these things, which you can go through leisurely. And it basically discusses open access, transmission pricing, and deviation settlement stuff, which are bare minimum for the cross-border energy trading, in our opinion. And from Sri Lanka, so let's have a quick look at the technical and hardware side of the interconnection. As you can see, it is 500 into 2 voltage source converter based thing. Altogether, it is 240 kilometer route, and it can also as a STATCOM to provide reactive power support. And the project cost is estimated to be 1.2 billion US dollars at the moment, which is the biggest hurdle we are facing at the moment. And the possible business models are also being explored. So there's no detailed project agreement with final figures as of now. So this is the unit cost comparison based on the few business models that we considered. So out of this, this was deemed the most viable. So it envisaged proposing and forming an special purpose vehicle with shareholdings of utilities of both sides, and it assumes 70%, 60% utilization at 35 years. And the transmission cost, as you can see, it comes up to like 7 US cents per kilowatt hour, which is not viable, and the energy transfer cannot occur if we model it as a throughput charge. So however, the capital cost if can be unbundled as a monthly capacity payment of sorts, then energy transfer becomes possible and free electricity trade. So coming back to our topic of regulatory aspects, so these are the regulatory instruments that we have proposed at the moment in the draft stage. So there's a quick seabed transaction regulation which identifies the roles and responsibilities of each party, and harmonizing dispute resolution and basic other aspects. These open access and trading regulations are actually a one document, even though it is mentioned as two separate ones. So it is proposed to be handled in the, now since CBET is considered the exclusive authority of national system operator, we are expected to have back-to-back commercial agreements with the transmission system operator and the trading partner in the other side of the India. And of course, there are changes to grid code and tariff methodology. And this is the resultant regulatory ecosystem. And it is to show the context in which these proposed regulatory tools will be placed. And there's also a capacity build component, which unfortunately we could not do because of this USAID fiasco. And this is the way forward we believe in. And I wanted to draw your attention to this depiction finally, which I believe it be different layers of that ultimately enables the regional market integration. And what I want to emphasize is the importance of all these layers. It's not just infrastructure, it's just not just nuts and bolts. These institutions, regulatory framework, and everything is what that ultimately enables cross-border energy trade. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, Duleep, I love that framework. Can I use it? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so next up is Mats Durand. As a principal consultant at DNV, Mats focuses on techno-economic analysis of decarbonization strategies for governments and private sector stakeholders. He leads DNV's evaluation work on electricity imports into Singapore and is managing a grid code harmonization effort for the ASEAN Center for Energy. He holds multiple degrees on innovation and sustainable energy from Eindhoven University of Technology. So Mats, welcome to the stage.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good to see that there's still a good turnout even for the Thursday morning session. As Gratian mentioned, I want to touch briefly upon a topic that has been the subject of a lot of the discussions earlier this week, which is the topic of harmonization, and more specifically, the harmonization of grid codes. As most of you know, the discussions on ASEAN Power Grid have been ongoing for about the last 30 years, since the original ASEAN Memorandum of Understanding in 1996. And since then, quite a lot of power trade has actually been developed in the region. However, most of that is limited to bilateral trade, and a lot of that is actually through generator to grid or plant to grid, rather than full interconnection of complete power systems. One of the key reasons that often cited for that is the lack of harmonization on the regulatory front, and especially when it comes to the technical operating standards. There have, of course, been some efforts in the region to try and harmonize grid codes, but so far those have had limited success. And I think it's very important that instead of trying to kind of redo and kind of make the same mistakes that we've made in the past, that we instead try to look towards other regions, understand essentially how did they achieve harmonization of their grid codes, and can we kind of develop a more sustainable pathway to actually get a certain level of harmonization required to support bilateral power trading. So for this, I'd like to touch on three examples that were also briefly already mentioned by Dilipa, so which are the European Union, SAP, and CIAPAC in Central America. What's also very important is that when people talk about grid codes, they often focus on the technical aspect, but actually also the governance, like how do you manage, keep your grid code updated, how do you enforce your grid code is also a very important topic that often gets forgotten. So also we'll touch a bit on the governance side. When people talk about the European Union, they of course recognize that power trade has happened for the last several decades. It's a fully integrated region. So people tend to assume that therefore also the grid code must have been in place for a very long time. This is actually not the case. So Europe tends to kind of deliver its energy legislation in packages, so they call it energy packages. And the work on a regional grid code actually did not start until 2009 with the third energy package, which kind of saw the formation of the body for the transmission system operators, NSOE, as well as the body for the regulators in ACER. From that point onward, because it's Europe, of course, it takes many, many years to actually align on everything between all the member states. So the first parts of the grid code on a regional level were not actually developed until 2015. And so the first batch of actual regional harmonization happened between 2015 and 2017, after which over the years additional packages have been released to kind of expand the grid codes. So they did not define it all at once, they just built it in packages and subcodes and kind of expanded it over time. With the latest ones being kind of focused on the addition of newer technologies such as battery systems, electric vehicles, how to handle kind of requirements for generators, as well as cybersecurity, and several more packages are currently underway. Of course, that doesn't mean that no power trade was possible before that, because they've been doing it for decades. So how did they do that? Well, there was actually kind of a combination of multiple different instruments that they had. So they had bilateral agreements between different parties. So as long as you have an interconnector between two countries, as long as those two countries are on the same page, power trade can happen without any issues. But there were also kind of a lot of more, let's say, informal forms of harmonization. There were a lot of committees set up to kind of ensure that the different countries were on the same page. And of course, when there were issues or disputes, then they had kind of emergency meetings that they were kind of doing on an ad hoc basis to ensure that everyone remained on the same page, as well as defining kind of a set of common technical standards that everyone tended to agree on. So even without any formal regional grid code, it was still possible in Europe to have multilateral power trade. But of course, formalizing the grid code did really help in kind of establish a common ground, common rules, as well, of course, a mechanism to keep everything up to date. When it comes to SAP, Stephen will share a bit more about SAP later, but SAP is a very interesting example also for ASEAN to learn from, because it was a kind of founded as with the express purpose of being a regionally integrated grid. And similar to ASEAN, there's no common market in SAP, but instead there's there's trading of surpluses and shortages, and kind of the countries essentially supporting each other through that. What you see in SAP is that instead of formalizing a grid code from the start, they said, okay, this is maybe too complicated. They started with a regional guideline. So this was much more on a voluntary basis, where the different countries would agree on a common set of principles, but were not codified into law, and there was no strict formal regulator there to enforce this. Additionally, SAP was, of course, also in a very different situation, whereas most countries in Europe already had grid codes in place. This was not the case in SAP. So actually, the regional guideline that was developed there would actually serve as kind of a template also for the different countries to later on develop their own guidelines. So also, a regional grid code or regional guideline can serve as kind of a good example for countries that still don't have their own national grid codes in place. They did, of course, at some point decide that, okay, we do want to formalize the code a bit more, mostly because we saw that certain countries were developing at a faster pace than others when it comes to the adoption of new technologies. So they did make the attempt to finally finalize the grid code, formalize it. However, because the formalization process has run into quite a lot of resistance, so formally it has not yet been ratified by all the different countries, so the guideline remains in place for now. The last example is CIAPAC. So CIAPAC is a single transmission line, about 1,800 kilometers, connecting 6 countries in Central America. It's about 300 megawatts. And while these countries were already trading between each other, they decided, okay, let's just integrate things fully on a regional basis, also with the purpose of trading surpluses. What's interesting about this one is that it's really clear that you cannot use a one-size-fits-all approach for all the different countries. While they were planning to have 300 megawatts in place everywhere, they realized that certain grids just had higher or lower strength than others, and therefore we were not able to achieve this full capacity, but needed a bit more of a tailored approach. In addition to this, we see some interesting points here, like a lot of the funding came from development banks, so this can also serve as an interesting template to see how ADB can potentially support this kind of mechanism. And lastly, there have been some conflicts and disputes between the different nations. So it's also on the governance side, it is very important to have like a proper dispute resolution mechanism in place to ensure that harmonization remains. So finishing off some key insights from these three different countries. First of all, the fact that you don't need harmonization of grid codes, it's not a requirement. However, of course, as you start doing more multilateral power trade between countries, it does become more and more important because things become more complex. And it's important to make sure that you keep your grid code up to date and applicable. There are different pathways, like Europe already, everyone had grid codes and they kind of try to bottom up, try to develop code from there, whereas in SAP, for example, the process was much more top down and it could serve as a template for other countries as well. As mentioned, both you need technical agreements, but also a proper governance process to ensure that you remain up to date and have an enforcement mechanism. And lastly, don't start with a full agreement from day one. Even in Europe, it took several decades to develop the grid code as it is now. So just start small and build it from there. And in the end, we'll make sure that we achieve harmonization. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt, for that excellent review and looking at what the opportunities are to take some of those learnings from around the world and apply them here in Asia Pacific. Our next speaker is Role Velasco Rosenheim. He's the Director of Partnerships and APAC Markets for the International Tracking Standard Foundation, ITRAC for short. He's also the founder of SUSCA Group, which does a lot of great work supporting countries to develop their frameworks for regional markets and renewable energy certificates. He's enabled hundreds of entities to source renewable electricity in line with guidance from global reporting frameworks. He currently helps governments and utilities to engage in environmental attribute markets through the globally recognized IREC standard. He has processed more than $200 million in grants and loans for development partners and oversees the issuance of 100 to 250 billion RECs per year. Those are some big numbers. So Roble, please come to the stage and help us demystify renewable energy certificates.
Well, thank you so much for having us here, to ADB for hosting, for ACE Partners bringing us together, and of course to Grayson for essentially bringing us all together into this room. We're going to do this in three sections, right? So we'll talk first of all about what a renewable energy certificate is. So how does this thing work, right? We're then going to look at how this applies to cross-border transactions, focusing on APG and the LTMS lines, and then we'll give a little snapshot at the progress we have underway, right? So let's start off with what a REC is, right? And in its simplest form, a renewable energy certificate is just a serial number that tells us where our electricity comes from. Now, this comes out of essentially a basic need for tracking. So if you think about colorless electrons getting produced, sent into a grid, and then onto their end users, we see that there's no clear way for that end user, pictured on the right-hand side, to say, my power comes from a specific source. So RECs in general come in to stamp the megawatt hour and say there's specific facts associated with this point of generation. It allows us to capture the financial value of that green bragging right, and essentially for the end user on the right-hand side to make a claim to a specific kind of electricity that they've consumed, right? So a REC in its basic form just tells us where our electricity comes from. There's different ways of transacting them. So if you're doing an unbundled transaction, you're buying your electricity in one place from a utility, from an IPP, and then you're buying a certificate separately. But in the majority of transactions, those bottom three, we're seeing the power and renewable energy certificate getting transacted together. The electricity doing its job, and the REC essentially being that proof of green consumption, right? So ITRAC Standard Foundation essentially just sets the rules for how you create these certificates and how you transact them. And I come out and basically explain how to integrate those into governments and into broader regional frameworks. So that's essentially the overview of the instrument itself. Let's take a look at what this means in practice along grids and interconnectivity, right? So a cross-border REC transaction is pretty straightforward. You go out, you produce the power in country A, you give it a serial number that says this is where and when it was produced, and then you redeem that or use that certificate against load in a second country. So it's pretty straightforward. And currently, the iTrack ecosystem, right, so the tracking systems allow these transactions to take place. And they're about 5% of our overall transactions. Not 100 billion, but 100 to 200 million per year, right? So that's within the APAC region. Now, what we don't see is recognition from reporting frameworks, right? So if you think about a corporate buyer, the entities that are purchasing these certificates, they're buying them for bragging rights, and they're buying them for public bragging rights. And they do that through public disclosure systems, like the Carbon Disclosure Project and others, right? Currently, these reporting frameworks do not recognize cross-border transactions even when the electrons are flowing. And this is kind of a problem, right? So this is an issue for a couple of reasons. First of all, if, for example, Malaysia is sending electricity to Singapore, the way that you transfer that green is denominated in RECs. So you need those RECs to essentially say this cross-border transaction was for renewable electricity. Obviously, the corporates then need the certificate to realize their willingness to pay for that green bragging right. And this has direct impacts on project bankability and financing in contexts where cross-border transactions are expected to be of a higher financial value. So if we fail to realize framework recognition of cross-border transactions, we're directly stunting the financial value of these cross-border transactions. And this will impact the APG, ASEAN Power Grid, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore transmission projects, right? So in the last 3 minutes, we're going to look at the progress that's underway, right? Again, I'll remind you that the reporting frameworks do not recognize cross-border transactions, but this can be changed, and we're in the process of changing that right now, right? So in 2022, one of the major reporting frameworks, RE100, comes out with essentially a set of 3 core principles. They say the electrons need to be moving across borders. You have to have the same EAC or REC instrument on both sides so that we're not at risk of making double claims or double counting. And the 2 countries have to have similar systems for disclosing their grid mix and residual mix averages to account for that cross-border trade, right? That was ultimately rejected, and as a result, in 2023, we see CDP, which is one of the members of RE100, adding an additional rule, and that's that top one right there. We see the point of rejection being nonprofits saying we do not want to encourage or be seen to encourage something that governments don't agree with. And so they went out and essentially said, okay, if there's good technical features, good technical components in place, we can recognize this, but we need to see some level of government-to-government agreement. This may not be as complex or sophisticated as we see under RED 2 and now RED 3, or potentially under SAP, but there does need to be some level of recognition that says country A and country B are willing and happy to participate in this cross-border trade. So here's where we stand today, right? There's 2 core challenges remaining. We have those 3 principles, right? So we know that conceptually the electrons need to move, we know that the governments need to be in agreement, the EAC frameworks, and so on and so forth. But these aren't necessarily actionable. There isn't a specific list of, there wasn't until recently, a specific list of data points that say, well, this is how you prove the electrons have moved across borders and been delivered. I see you, Grayson, 1 minute. So what's happening now is those best practices are in the process of being written, and we expect to see them published within the year. The second thing is that the ecosystems in which you track these transactions aren't yet able to demonstrate in a uniform way that the RECs have been associated with that power, and that work is also underway. So this is my last slide. It's just looking at sort of the next steps and essentially where we are now. So we've got an array of just really stellar technical experts working on actually establishing these best practices and data requirements. We see these being put into place by essentially public systems. So iTrack has got a public set of rules. We see individual countries now participating in defining what they're going to require from an export perspective and from an import perspective. And we see these potentially getting escalated to a regional level. I'll leave you by saying that we see these materials becoming public within the year. We'll be requesting feedback, so please get my contact details. And we do expect to see pilots within the year and cascading into next. You can send email questions to that address, and thank you very much for your time.
Great stuff, Roble. And this is, as Roble described, this is something that's ongoing now, and it's perceived as kind of a missing link in regional power trade, especially regional power trade with renewable electricity. So very exciting times. Okay, our next speaker is Reena Suri. She's the Executive Director of the India Smart Grid Forum, or ISGF, which is a PPP, public-private partnership initiative of the Government of India. With over 2 decades of power sector experience, she has advanced smart grid policies, digital transformation, and clean energy adoption in India. Under her leadership, ISGF has emerged as a leading platform for innovation and collaboration on smart grids, e-mobility, energy storage, grid interactive buildings, and many other topics. So please, welcome to the stage, Reena.
Thank you so much, Grayson, for that introduction, and a very good morning to all. It's a pleasure to be here at the Asia Clean Energy Forum again, and very big thank you to ADB and ACE partners for having us here. And it's a pleasure again to be in this beautiful city of Manila. So today's presentation, I'll be exploring the digital energy grids, enablers of regional power trade markets. We are currently witnessing a significant transition towards increasingly integrated power markets, as we've been hearing from different panelists and speakers in various sessions that we've had here. And this isn't just about building more transmission lines, it's about the evolving interconnectedness of power systems and at national and regional levels. And that's going to be a big win because the larger interconnected power grids are more efficient to manage in evolving era of rapidly growing intermittent renewable energy sources that we have seen getting connected to the grid. India's own variable energy, renewable energy penetration is rising fast and approaching about over 50%, and that's the case is going to be for most of the countries working on the net zero targets. And that necessitates sophisticated grid management strategies. Beyond the physical transmission, integrated operation of the regional grids, it requires harmonization of the standards, policies, and grid codes. And as the digital grids of the future evolve, imagine a future where individuals can buy seamlessly electricity from anyone, from anywhere on digital platforms, facilitating seamless online payments. So that's unlocking truly an open electricity markets is what we are looking forward to. So this vision is actively being built in India through our 3 energy exchanges, which offer a variety of products and market segments. For instance, the integrated day-ahead market allows physical electricity trading for the next day. The real-time trading market operates 48 sessions every day for delivering within an hour. And the thermo-ahead market offers contracts for up to 90 days. We also have a specialized green thermo-ahead market and green day-ahead market specifically for the renewable energy trading. Furthermore, new regulations are emerging and promoting the peer-to-peer trading of solar rooftop energy. First of its kind regulations and guidelines have also been issued in India by 3 different states, state regulators. And also one of the states in India has issued draft guidelines for enabling vehicle to grid technology as well. And so these innovative regulations and markets are creating differentiated products and, which can be traded across India's energy exchanges. So what exactly, are the digital energy grids that we are looking forward to? With real-time monitoring, two-way communications, and artificial intelligence driven, forecasting, the digital grids provide the intelligence and agility needed to manage the dynamic energy flows. And as our energy systems evolve, the combination of these digital grids and technologies like blockchain is opening an exciting opportunity and possibilities, especially for decentralized energy trading. And it brings trust into the equation, making it possible for the producers and consumers to trade electricity directly, securely, and automatically. And this isn't just a technical upgrade that we are looking at. It's going to be a major shift towards a future that enables real-time energy trading and from peer-to-peer and eventually even cross borders. India is making significant strides in peer-to-peer, as I mentioned, that we peer-to-peer pilot projects have been undertaken, directly contributing to development of digital energy grids. Currently, peer-to-peer trading allows producers with rooftop solar to sell their green electricity to other consumers. And ISGF has successfully implemented 3 pilots in Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, and West Bengal. And regulations have also been issued by these 3 states, and draft regulation by the 4th one. And many are looking forward to similar regulations. So ISGF is also actively working on demonstration of this peer-to-peer trading on going forward on a unified energy interface platform in one of the states in India, and which is expected to go live very soon. And this is going to be making the birth of the energy internet of the future. And in the near future, we are also looking at scenarios where the smart appliances that we have, in our houses, they can automatically purchase cheapest and cleanest energy directly using these unified energy interface platforms to meet their energy needs. And this signifies an evolving era of green energy communities where anyone can buy a green energy from anywhere in India or eventually across borders. Uh, as I mentioned, this is an open source platform, the Unified Energy Interface. It is powered by a Beacon protocol, and this technology neutral framework was developed by Beacon Foundation in India with FIDE as its technical partner. And this platform enables decentralized peer-to-peer transactions across sectors like mobility, energy, and commerce, agriculture, and circular services. And built around a simple yet robust flow discovery, order, fulfillment, and post-fulfillment. And the protocol ensures a transparent and efficient digital interactions. So the impact of these open network ecosystems built on open protocols like Beacon is already evident and impressive. We have examples of open mobility network in India where more than 0.3 million drivers and 0.6 million users are already registered and using the system. It facilitates approximately 0.3 million rides daily and has unlocked over 70 million USD to direct drivers. And just highlighting on the energy sector impact of these open networks, from February 8 to May 2024 has seen over 0.28 total transactions and dispensed over 2100 megawatt hour of energy. So I'm not going to go into the details of this open network because of the time paucity. Just this is an architecture that we had created for peer-to-peer energy platform, using unified energy interface, which is going to be launched soon. And this is an architecture where the Beacon protocol is the backbone of the future peer-to-peer trading networks. So just two more slides to go. What is the what are the regional power trade digital opportunities that are there? The digital grids present a significant opportunity for regional power trade. They can accelerate multi-country grid coordination through faster grid synchronization, the lower transaction costs by reducing disputes through transparent digital records, and the digital grids also are going to enhance the utilization of renewable energy across diverse geographic regions through effective renewable energy pooling. And furthermore, they expand participation in renewable regional power exchanges by providing a scalable market access. And this is my last second slide. To fully realize the potential, we need good governance, data governance, interoperability standards, having a regulatory sandbox to test beds for innovative market models is required, and dynamic pricing support, and lastly, but most important, cybersecurity mandates. And just leave you with some recommendations for the future regional power markets. Based on the insights that I've shared, we have several key recommendations, but the first one I would like to highlight is development of a digital readiness index to benchmark the utilities technology maturity across the region. Second, established a data interoperability task force to coordinate standards and facilitate cross-border integration. Third, promote a multi-country pilot project to test digital power trade, innovations in real-time, real-world scenarios. And lastly, and critically, focus on digital resilience and embedding robust cyber and operational security into all aspects of digital grid development. So thank you so much for your attention, and look forward to more questions and continuing the dialogue beyond this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rita. Really very exciting. It's really, in a way, it kind of turns the traditional power sector upside down if you have peer-to-peer trading at the level of the consumers rather than having the power flowing from big generators down over the grid. So very exciting stuff, and shows what digitalization can do for so many sectors. So next, last but not least, we have Stephen Nash. He's the founder of Kungana Advisory. With 2 decades of energy sector advisory experience, Stephen has worked with donors and multilaterals on a wide range of equity and debt investments. Stephen's work spans policy, regulation, economics, and commercial and financial advisory, all of the elements required to facilitate energy sector investment. So Stephen, welcome to the stage.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and good morning to everybody. So, I'm not going to spend my time talking about what we do at Kungana Advisory, but I hope that through the presentation that I'm going to give, you will get a bit of a sense for the analytical work that we do to support the energy transition in the middle and low-income countries that we focus on. So look forward to carrying on the conversation around that over the next couple of days. What I do want to talk about is electricity trade, unsurprisingly. And what we've got here is a graph that actually looks at some of the regions that have been mentioned already today. So across the x-axis here, I have a number of countries across the bottom in Europe, Africa, and specifically Southern Africa, the Southern Africa Power Pool, Southeast Asia, and then Central America. And what these bars are showing, the orange bars are imports, red bars are exports, and expressed as a percentage of total electricity supply in those markets. And the one thing to take away from this is that the trade numbers in Southeast Asia are just very low, clear counterexample being the exports from Laos, of course. Now, it's not just the existence of trade that I want to talk about, it's the type of trade that's taking place. So as we get more and more intermittent renewables on the system, then the type of trades will change, right? So resource availability in adjacent markets will be evolving over time. In 1 hour, it might make sense to import to a country. In the next hour, it might make sense to export. So the bidirectionality of trade is going to matter. And what the second graph here, exactly the same countries, is looking at the bidirectionality of trade in each market. So to what extent are these countries trading in both directions across interconnectors? 100% on this indicates balance between imports and exports. 0% means that all the trade is really happening in one direction. Again, Southeast Asia, not exclusively this time, but it does stand out as most of that trade really being in one direction. So why does this matter? We've heard from a number of speakers around the benefits of cross-border electricity trade. So a lot of our work is doing power market modelling, and we've done some modelling in the Southern Africa region to look at some of these benefits in a little bit more detail. So we modelled 6 scenarios, which I'm going to summarise very quickly on this slide. And those 6 scenarios are expressed across 2 dimensions. So the roads here, we're looking at a base case, and then we're looking at a high renewables case where we put a lot more variable renewable energy on the system. And then in the columns, we're looking at 3 market design type scenarios. So on the left-hand side, looking at a scenario where there is no trade between each of these countries. On the far right-hand side, we're looking at a world where there is free trade between countries. So these power flows can be optimized on an hour-by-hour basis. In the middle, we've got what I've called a block trade scenario. And here we can trade, but we can only trade in very kind of blocky ways. So maybe with base load contracts or mid-merit contracts. The red arrows on here are showing the relative cost differences between the scenarios. The single biggest thing here is that there's a massive cost reduction just with bringing in renewables. And this is focusing on the short run cost of the system. So that's not the kind of focus of this discussion. The focus really is more on what's going from left to right. So you see there are cost reductions both as you move towards the block trade and the free trade scenario. But 2 key things to take away from this. The first one is that there is a bigger cost saving when we move from that block trade to free trade scenario than in the first step. And what that means is that the market arrangements to be able to enable this flexible trade are at least as important as putting the interconnector there in the first place. And then the second thing to take away is that the numbers on the bottom row are higher. So that first conclusion becomes ever more important as we get more renewables on the system. So how do these cost savings come about? We can see that quickly by looking at some price duration curves. Now, if you're not familiar with a price duration curve, what this is showing is it's taking the hourly prices from our market models and taking all 8,760 hours in the year, and it's stacking up from the most expensive hours on the left-hand side to the cheapest hours on the right-hand side. And we've got the 3 scenarios here. So the orange line is my no trade scenario, the red one is the block trade scenario, and the blue is the free trade scenario. And you can see that as we liberalize trade, we get less extreme high prices and less extreme low prices. So what does this mean in practical terms? It means that as we liberalize trade, we're protecting consumers from high price periods, and in some cases we might be protecting them from load shedding as well. But also, those reducing the number of 0 price periods is also actually a benefit in a sense as well, because what that's telling us is that we're reducing the amount of curtailment of renewable energy on the system. So we're making better use of pooled renewable energy assets. So we can see what the benefits are, and given that importance, what are the ingredients that we need to have in place to unlock some of the benefits that we've seen on the previous slide? So infrastructure, no surprises, that's the obvious one. We need strong business cases for the interconnectors that we're going to put in place, but also, and this is really the point that I'm trying to make through the previous slides, we need really the right regulatory and market structures and then the right commercial and financing models to support that bidirectional trade as well. How do the 4 regions that we started with how do they do when we assess against those 4 criteria? So these ticks are obviously judgmental. I'm sure we could debate at length whether these are correct, as it were. First key thing to take away is all of these regions, even if we're looking at Europe, there are challenges around getting the right transmission in the right place. This is something that every country is struggling with at the moment in terms of how to do that in the most effective way. Europe has been kind of mentioned already as a bit of an example, but as Matt said, it took a while to get there. If we look at SAP, we often look at SAP as an example, has a day ahead market in place, but there's very low liquidity on that market. So in reality, most of the trade is actually bilateral and unidirectional as well. Central America has also been mentioned on the right-hand side here. Again, regulatory alignment actually remains a challenge in some of those markets. So while there is a regional market in place, not all countries are well integrated into that market. And then we've got ASEAN, which is at an earlier stage at the moment in setting up some of these structures to be able to support trade in the future, or more trade in the future. So we can see that strong regional interconnectors are going to be a really important ingredient to achieving a least cost energy transition. And it's really important that obviously the infrastructure is critically important, but it's not the only thing. Market and commercial arrangements are also going to be a really key ingredient of that. And as we get more renewable energy onto the system, the type of market and commercial arrangements that we need to have in place will also change. And so to have responsive and multi-directional trade, that's going to require a really liberalized market framework going forwards. Thank you.
So Stephen, if you have what you need for the panel discussion, you could just take your seat at the very far end of the table. Okay, so now I'm going to summon the speakers to become panelists. So please, Rena, if you could go and sit next to Stephen there, that would be great. And Roble. And then Mats. And then Dileepa. And I will take, if there's one seat left, I'll take it. Okay, welcome to the panel discussion portion of the program. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of the panelists the question that's been pre-rehearsed, you could say a little bit, and he'll have an opportunity, he or she will have an opportunity to respond. And we'll do that once or twice. We'll do one or two rounds depending upon how the time looks. But we are going to save time for questions from the audience at the end. And I think the organizers owe me an iPad with the questions that are coming from the floor. So if the organizers could bring me that iPad, that would be great. But let's get started here. Okay, Dileepa, what are the main barriers you expect to encounter in developing cross-border electricity trade with India?
As I mentioned in the presentation, the main hurdle that we are facing at the moment is the cost of interconnection. Because it would have been much cheaper if we could have a simple AC link as Nepal or Bhutan could. But unfortunately, due to the topology and geography, we'd have to go with the OC cable with HVDC is being proposed, even though our some counterparts would like to have an AC interconnection at a smaller scale. So those are the cost is the main impediment, because we need certain amount of utilization, some kind of anchor industry. So that I believe is the main thing. The infrastructure is there in India, as Reena has elaborated, but the way to utilize this by using appropriate financial and business models is the key challenge.
Yeah, that's tough. There was a presentation yesterday from one of your colleagues talking about this issue, and I asked a question: why don't you just rate base it between the two utilities on the Indian side and the Sri Lankan side? But it's not that easy if the infrastructure itself doesn't support the amount of power flow. So thanks for that response, Mats. What are your specific suggestions for progressing an ASEAN grid code?
I think the main thing to Thanks, Raisin. I think the main thing to realize is that the different countries in ASEAN are really coming from a different starting point. So certain countries in ASEAN already have an existing grid code in place, while others don't, or grid codes are still in development, they're being updated right now. But on the other hand, there's also significant differences in how modern or expansive the infrastructure is in different countries. So when it comes to things like grid codes, when it comes to recommending how to move forward, typically what people tend to do is they look internationally at, for example, Europe or the US and say, okay, well, this is the best practice, then essentially try to copy their homework and try to then replicate or duplicate that grid code in these different countries. However, if you see that the countries are in different locations as a starting point, like if the gap is too big, it becomes too difficult or too complicated or too expensive for these countries to actually get to the level that is required for that higher level of harmonization. So really what the key recommendation for ASEAN is that instead of trying to just copy what Europe is doing, can we just start by identifying what's really the minimum requirements? So instead of trying to do everything at once, can we figure out, okay, what do we really essentially need to enable more power trade, ideally multilateral power trade within the region? Start from there, get the countries comfortable, showcase the benefits of this initial level of harmonization, and then can just build from there. Like just with Europe, it took 2 decades to develop the grid code to where it is right now. Can we just really start with the basics, the essentials, and then slowly move from there and enhance the grid code over time?
Make a start, absolutely. So I have a message for the audience here. I'm looking at my iPad, and I only have 2 questions from all of you out there. So I want you to go to the Wovia app and put your questions in so that we can take the time reserved for the Q&A from the audience. So thank you for that. Roble. So cross-border electricity trade, renewable energy certificates are recognized in the EU and North America. What are the acceptable best practices in those regions that the Asia-Pacific region needs to aspire to get recognized?
I think it's worth starting by saying that the acceptance of cross-border transactions in the EU and North America were really grandfathered in. So when you look at sort of the literature that's out there, RE100 basically says, yeah, these markets are mature and established. And I think that maybe 3 years ago when countries started pushing for acceptance in this region, they had to kind of come up with a rationale for why. Why is it already accepted there? And they said, well, Europe's got joint regulation. It's got RED 2 at the time and now RED 3. So they had to sort of reverse engineer that and look through, well, what are the things, okay, what are the core features? And that conversation within Greenhouse Gas Protocol for Scope 2 accounting, RE100, Science-Based Targets Initiative, is still getting sort of hammered out, right? But the core features are pretty straightforward. So the first is deliverability. Do the electrons move from country A to country B? And can that be demonstrated? And I think that non-EU, non-North American markets are going to be held to a higher bar because there's so much spotlight on that. And so I think that the work that's being done right now to actually define how do you prove the movement of electrons across borders will be more robust here than it is in other markets. That's the first, the movement of electrons. The second, which is the case in the EU and US markets, is you have either the same registry or the same set of rules, right? So Europe uses the guarantee of origin. That's basically a set of rules. It's aligned with a public standard, CEN 123 or something like that, which essentially says this is all of the rules on how you do issuance. And that is in place now in the region here as well. I think that probably what's missing, at least in Southeast Asia, is a clear venue for governments to express their preferences. Right, so if you look at the European energy community, it's a really strong bloc of 30 plus countries that have a really strong harmonized voice. And so when they go into these basic negotiations with Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they say we 30 some countries are out here and we really, really want this. And when we see these conversations taking place in Southeast Asia or in East Asia, they tend to be individual countries saying, hey, we'd like this. And so I think that there's now a really pronounced need to sort of unionize those voices in a way and get a really strong singular message, which is this is what we want. And so I think that that consensus building activity is what's needed and what's taking shape now.
No, that's really well put, and many of the speakers over the last few days have talked about the need for regional solidarity, the need to have a shared regional vision, and this falls under that broad category of the ASEAN being the framework under which these countries need to come together to build their political clout, to build their market clout, to bring subsea technology to the region. So many different things. So thank you for that. Rina, renewable energy penetration is rising fast in India, now approaching 50%. What kind of grid problems has this created, and how have smart grids helped to manage this higher VRE penetration?
Thank you for the question, Grayson. And yes, India's renewable energy now makes over 43% of the total installed capacity. And with some of the states seeing the renewable energy contributing to over 50% of the daily demand. And this high share of variable renewable energy has created a lot of great challenges like frequency instability and voltage swings and forecasting gaps. However, India has built green corridors which are high voltage transmission lines connecting the solar farms with wind farms, and also have we have built the renewable energy management centers with very sophisticated tools for weather prediction, renewable energy generation forecasting. And these measures taken early by the government of India are really helping to manage the renewable energy. And another advantage is our huge transmission network that is managed by the Power Grid Corporation, which is the largest in the world. And we have over 130 gigawatt of inter-regional power transfer capacity, which helps manage the temporary dips in solar and wind generation. So we currently are able to manage with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Rena. Stephen, so your presentation suggested that market arrangements will need to be developed and adapted to promote renewable energy power trade. How much demand are you expecting for such trade? How big a factor will renewable energy power trade be?
So I think the short answer is quite a lot, and we're seeing plenty of that already, right? So just for renewable energy trade more broadly, regardless of whether it's sort of within country or cross-border, corporate targets and consumer preferences on the one hand are driving a lot of that. But also, particularly in a market like in markets that sell goods to Europe and UK and other countries that are starting to bring in cross-border carbon prices over the next few years. And that's actually having quite a fundamental impact on this and demand for direct procurement of renewable energy. So I think that's a really important trend. We're seeing more and more C&I projects. Now, as I said, most of that activity is happening within country. But there are, in places like Europe, but also actually in Southern Africa, we're seeing quite a lot of deals that we're advising on, particularly for, say, some of the big mines in the region and so on, that are looking to wheel power across the region. And that's an emerging trend, particularly in places like Southern Africa, actually, where some of the individual markets are quite small in terms of the amount of power capacity that they have available. So yeah, and I think what's really critical there is that the fact that a lot of this is happening within country actually points us towards some of the stuff I was talking around market liberalization. Actually, a good place to start is just getting some of that in place even within country, because that's kind of provides the starting point for then being able to get market arrangements in place to help with cross-border trade as well.
Thanks, Stephen. So I see the audience has risen to my challenge because I now have more questions on the app here. So thank you for that. And I think we're going to mix and match here. I'm going to take some. I'm going to read off some of the questions here to make sure that the audience gets their questions answered rather than hearing answers to the questions that I came up with. So here we go. Is renewable energy certificate considered a negotiable instrument such that it carries commercial value that can be transferred to another? So this is a question for Roble, obviously.
And the answer is yes, absolutely, right? So, I mean, like the most common question that we get is how much are these things worth, right? And I am not allowed to have any answer on that at all. But they're typically negotiated bilaterally, and what I can explain is the factors that push up and down prices. I'll also point out that per megawatt hour within the ASEAN region, we see some of the more supply flooded markets, they'll float, as low as 60 to 80 US cents per megawatt hour. And in some of the more demand constrained markets, we've seen them breach $100 per megawatt hour. So there's an enormous range. And I think that cross-border transactions will levelize that quite a bit, which is quite nice. Factors that affect price are fuel type. So generally there's a preference for solar and wind. So fuel type is one. The age of generation, what we call the vintage. So that's when the actual power was produced, means that over time, the actual financial value of a REC decreases, right? If I'm a corporate buyer, say Google, I'm looking to get as close to the minute of consumption and match that with the point of production. So if I'm thinking, oh yeah, I've got my 2023 vintage RECs, those aren't worth much. And if I can get them down to sale within, you know, a 15-minute interval of when I produce power, that's probably going to be peak value. And then obviously supply and demand factors within domestic markets have a big impact. So yeah, bilaterally negotiated. We often don't, the foundation itself often doesn't see the price. But again, I'm aware of a range from 60 cents to 100 and plus, you know, 100 plus US dollars a megawatt hour.
Thanks, Roble. So I had an interesting question here. Are there limits for energy trading per buyer or limits for per seller such that equality is promoted on the capital side? I'm not exactly sure how to answer this, but I think I give Matt and then Stephen a crack at this. Let me read it again. Are there limits for energy trading per buyer, I guess in a liberalized framework, or per seller such that equality is promoted on the capital side?
I'm not sure I'm quite following the capital point, but I think ultimately there shouldn't really be any limits on trading. In fact, what you'll see in very liberalized markets with high liquidity is actually the volumes being traded will be many times the actual amount of demand. So liquidity is critical, right? And actually one of the things that you know, it's not just the exchange itself maybe, but you might have, as a market becomes more sophisticated, secondary markets and things that develop as well. So energy will actually be traded several times before it's delivered in many cases. And having that liquidity there is critical to the effectiveness of a market. I mentioned that the SAP market, for example, you know, lots of things that SAP has done well, but one of the things that really holds it back at the moment is low liquidity in the day ahead market, which is its kind of main trading platform. And actually that then kind of means that, when you talked about equality, they're actually making the market more accessible really does require that liquidity so that new market participants can have volume that they can access. So I hope that answers the question. I've understood it correctly.
I'll try to add on then also from my perspective, because I think equality is a very important topic in general, especially when it comes to power trading. I think people want to make sure that there's benefits for both sides of the trade, but of course I think it's important to recognize that both the cost and the benefits can really differ from transaction to transaction. So of course some countries are going to be primarily exporters, so they will have benefit through like additional economic activity, kind of generating more revenue for basically the companies or the generators within their country. But of course for the import side, they will not generate additional revenue, but they will have the benefit of having access to additional low-cost power that essentially also will be a lot cleaner than what they have today. In addition to this, of course, you also need to take into account kind of the social cost, because you want to kind of avoid that. For example, like if you need to build additional hydropower in one country for the purpose of exporting, there will also be a social cost or an environmental cost associated with that. And of course, figuring out how you can ensure that there's sufficient benefit for everyone is quite important. You can, of course, look at it and say, okay, who is going to get the cost and the benefits, and use that then as a template for also determining who is going to pay for the interconnector, who will put as much capital down. So that would be one way to potentially distribute it. However, of course, in practice, you see that some countries just basically have much more money, or larger countries than others. So often what you see is that the capital cost will be distributed based on like the ability or the willingness to pay. And similarly, kind of the benefits, or at least the economic benefits of the interconnector, will be split along kind of the shares of capital brought in. So while of course equality is important in terms of ensuring that everyone has benefit, it is not really a requirement when it comes to kind of, let's say, the distribution of the capex between countries.
Yeah, that's interesting, and you brought in that extra dimension of who bears the cost for the interconnection to make the trading possible. And one of the European speakers cited this as an element that's helped grid development in the EU, and that is allocating transmission costs according to the benefits as opposed to according to the costs. And that's really a different way to look at it, when you don't just look at how many miles it is for each country's border, but rather what the benefits are for one country versus another. So that's another form of equality, if you will. So thanks for those responses. Rena, I have a question for you. How does peer-to-peer trading ensure that prices are fair and consumers are not overcharged?
Thank you for the question. In case the previous question also, yeah, like was to be answered in the context of peer-to-peer trading. When are there any limits you can do the transactions on peer-to-peer? So I would say, like any. The generated amount on by a prosumer recorded by the smart meter is something they can trade to their peers. So the limit is to how much they generate in that context. But for the second question, which is how does peer-to-peer trading ensure that these prices are fair? Like the peer-to-peer trading, the buyers and sellers, they negotiate the price on the platform and get into a smart contract, and do the transactions. And currently, the regulations are still in the nascent stage. They are not defining the limits or the tariffs, but going forward, we'll be looking at a different scenario where on this platform, like there could be some limits to how much, because so much of renewable penetration is there, and if these kind of transactions have to take place, how much somebody can transact at what cost? Maybe it'd be a more regulated market.
Let me follow up on that. So I'm curious. So the peer-to-peer trading, I mean, that's really an exciting concept. And I know that there was a concept where you'd have peer-to-peer lending, whether instead of going to a bank, you'd go to your neighbor to ask for a loan. So this is, I mean, sort of like that in a way, peer-to-peer. But
No,
so how does it work? It's at the community level? So your next door neighbor has solar rooftop?
So, in currently how it's working with the pilot that we have done in India, how it's working is that, in the same distribution network, you as a prosumer and me as a consumer, if you're producing something which is more than how much you can utilize, you can get onto this platform and bid for the day that I have so many extra units I want to trade. And as a consumer, I'm looking forward to green energy, buying green energy, and I'm ready to pay, the same amount that you, or we negotiate and we get into a contract. And even though the energy is transacted through the existing distribution network, but we can get into a contract and do the transaction and settle the payment. And the traded units are being communicated to the network operator, who's doing the final, bill, reducing the amount we have traded. So that's the scenario we are looking at right now. And the regulations currently, what India has in one of the states, it's bringing a third-party operator, which is providing this platform and helping the consumers and buyers to get into contract and settle the amount. And whereas the utility gets a wheeling charge, or the transmission charges, and is a win-win for the utility also. They're not losing the prosumers by we just doing the transactions, but they also stay in the business this way.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very interesting. Yeah, there has to be a piece of the pie for the utility, because they're the one that is losing the business otherwise if with peer-to-peer trading. So very, very interesting. That could be a whole workshop in itself to talk more about that. Thank you. I have a question for Dileepa here. If for the Sri Lankan grid stability, there is the need for cross-border interconnection, then why are you always worried about the cost and the cost? Maybe in the long run, the cost may be recovered or justified based upon the reliability improvements. I added that last bit. So
Yeah, the simple problem is when it comes to the cross-border energy trading, we haven't quantified the benefits of reliability. I think it is in a way emanating from the previous couple of questions that answered by Stephen and Robert, where the quantification of the benefits is a quick question. Now we don't have any ancillary services markets, even though there are term ahead, day ahead, and over-the-counter trading happening. Now, if you look at a market like UK or elsewhere, where different 14 odd services of ancillary services for black start capability, frequency support, and various other forms of things are traded, we don't have that kind of mechanism. And also, for us to quantify that benefit, now, mind you, we as a small island is operating at sometimes asynchronous penetration levels of more than 60%, and with only one coal plant with large edge constraints. So it's system operations is quite a challenge. So for us to add more renewable energy, we also need some kind of grid support. Unfortunately, the market simulations and the power system studies does not yield. I mean, there are benefits of AC interconnection and HVDC. That's why I said the modality is what is critical. At the moment, there had been no consensus about this joint working committee on technical teams on what is the mode of interconnection. And obviously Indians, they prefer to have HVDC connection so that the disturbances and everything is separated. We also would like it, but the cost is the question, and that's why I said the economics and the business models are being explored. Unfortunately, if we had a different kind of border and topology, where like in Nepal or Bhutan, where we could have simple couple of AC connections, things would have been much simpler.
Okay, interesting. So good luck with coming up with a solution that'll enable that interconnection. It's not that far from mainland India to Sri Lanka. So yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, here's an interesting one, and we've talked about it a little bit already. Does ASEAN have the right architecture for negotiating these various agreements needed for grid codes and renewable energy certificates trade? Can these be negotiated at a technical level only, or do they also require leadership from ministers and leaders? So I'm going to ask Roble to start with that, and then maybe Matt's I'll talk about it also.
You know, if I'd gotten this question 2 years ago, I would have been a lot more complaining. And I'm so heartened to say that there is really strong leadership in this in ASEAN right now. Yesterday I was at the RESSN meetings, renewable energy subsector meetings hosted by ACE, and we had deputy ministers, we had, just a really, really, really good turnout of governance actors voicing their interest in facilitating this and making it possible and engaging. I think that the piece that's missing now is it's not the fault of any organization. It's the next thing to do, and I think that people are organizing around it, which is collecting voices. And so I think that one of the things that we're seeing in the region is different countries have varying levels of expertise in these markets, and in a very happy way we see support. So I think that, for example, Thailand was one of the first in the region to step up, appoint sort of an entity to manage its national rec market, and they're working in just beautiful ways with Lao to develop capacity, to do so in a fair and balanced way. And so I think that what's missing now is collecting those voices. The side of it which is, in my view, a little bit disappointing is not within the region, it's within the international community. And I don't think personally that the reporting frameworks have structured an effective way of reviewing requests from governments and regions. And so while ASEAN is doing more than it should be doing, really going above and beyond, bringing voices together, looking at the technical dialogues, what I'm most concerned about is how are the reporting frameworks going to review, acknowledge, and respond to collected voices, right? And that's yet to be seen.
The add-on for the grid codes, because of course the grid codes are not dependent on any sort of reporting standard or external influence, so it's really an ASEAN internal thing. And to give a short answer, yes, definitely we have the architecture in place within ASEAN. So for those who are not familiar, ASEAN already has several different kind of coordinating committees or working groups on different levels between different types of stakeholders. So there's first of all HAPOA, the heads of power utilities, so that's a collaborative environment where all the different utilities come together in several different working groups, some of which touch on like ASEAN power grid related topics as well. Similarly, there's EARN, the Association for Energy Network Regulators. There's an APGCC, an APG ASEAN Power Grid Coordination Committee, and there's even on the ministry level, there's a few of these as well. I think what we see is that especially on like the technical level, people are definitely very much aligned. I think a lot of them are working very hard. They're on the same page about the technical side of things. But of course, what you always need is that they need a mandate from the ministry level. They need a mandate from kind of the real key decision makers. And I think that's always the thing that's a bit slower. I think a lot of the countries need to, of course, be convinced that there's sufficient benefit for them, that it's achievable, that it basically helps bring their economies forward as well, that there's no negative downsides for their people. So I think the architecture is definitely in place. I think it really, what we're waiting for is kind of the decision making coming from the top. And then the people on the ground, I think they're all ready and they're very willing to work on this and make it happen.
Thanks, Matt. So I have another question that's kind of within that framework a little bit. And there's a couple questions here from the audience about, for example, what factors determine the share of variable renewable energy that could be integrated into the power grid? And there's another question here. As countries try to build more energy storage, does it make the bar higher for cross-border trading, especially if instances of curtailment come down over time? And I just want to add, my question is about how can we make variable renewable energy more importable and exportable and acceptable as a general proposition? So I'm going to ask that to Matt to start with. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I think one of the things that people kind of tend to forget is that like renewable penetration or integrating of renewables is primarily a domestic issue first. So of course, like there's a lot of different mechanisms, especially when it comes to the regulatory front, but also on the technical front, to essentially help mitigate the impacts of variable renewables, whether it's, for example, through the managing of power quality or when it comes to like the generation planning to kind of ensure stability. So I think the first starting point should always be that people need to, or countries need to manage their own domestic codes first, to ensure that essentially the impacts of renewables on their grids are mitigated. And there's many different ways and different frameworks and different standards that can be used for that to kind of enhance that. But of course, when it comes to then the second point is, okay, how can you make it a more suitable export product? And of course, a lot of that is about making sure that also when you produce a lot of renewables, it does not affect the grids on the other side. Here, of course, there will be significant differences between whether you use like an AC interconnector or a DC interconnector. There's different technical measures, but a lot of it comes down to the regulatory side. It comes down to, for example, putting certain requirements on renewable producers to mitigate the impact that they have on the grid. It comes to deployment of technologies such as BESS, potentially STATCOMs or other types of newer technologies that can really help create a bit, let's say, more stability and reduce power quality issues before you export.
Thanks, Ben. So I want to ask Rena this also. So Rena, India is approaching 50% renewable energy, and around that level, maybe even a little bit less, you start to have some of these issues and coping with variable renewable energy and having the resiliency, having the grid resiliency needed to balance that up and down nature of wind and solar. How is that playing out in India, especially with regard to the Indian power exchange?
So in my previous question, I talked about the measures that India is already taking, coming out with green energy corridors, having a renewable energy management centers. So I think to better manage the variable renewable energy sources, the larger the grid, the better you can manage. So India anyway is currently has one grid which is a totally integrated grid throughout the country with five different regional management load centers managing the whole grid with a central coordination center. And so the larger, as I mentioned, the larger the grid, the better you can better manage the grid. And going forward, the interconnections that we are looking at and we already have are going to definitely support, the VRE going forward. And with this kind of a grid interactivity, it gives us better spinning reserves, and also, it helps with the energy storage and demand flexibility. They all play a very key factor in the future of VRE and further increase that we are looking forward to.
And just to follow up on that from the REX point of view, so there's a lot of hydro coming from Nepal to into India. Is anybody claiming the environmental attributes of that?
So I was happy to onboard Nepal 2 years ago, and when it was coming on, I remember thinking to myself, well, what'll be the end use function of this, right? Because it's basically a clean grid. I mean, Nepal is just phenomenally clean grid. There are not, to my knowledge, cross-border high volume transactions of cross-border RECs taking place between Nepal and India. I think that this is something that we want to watch for, particularly in the context of RPO requirements. You've got renewable portfolio obligations in India, and I think that watching the sort of intersection of what imports could do to that would be really, really impressive. So it's not something that's currently, to my knowledge anyways, taking place at scale, and it's something that there could potentially be a market for. The other thing, last thing that I'll say on this, is that India is pretty shy about exporting its environmental commodities in general. And so I think that the stance that it's taken as a nation on sort of import-centric and export-shy could potentially really favor that commercially. It'd be interesting to watch.
I have to ask Rena for comments on any of that. REX in India and cross-border export shy.
Yeah, I was careful.
No, we are energy surplus country now, and but of course our demands are growing really fast, and our internal consumption is very high. And even though we are looking at a trajectory where we are including a lot of new energy generation resources, but our demand at the same time is much higher. So I think one of the reasons could be that our population is huge and our country geography is really diverse, and our demands are very high. So with the climate change that we are looking at, it's going to be further going to create more demand for the power by the consumers within India.
I think what you are looking at is actually not about the Indian market, because at the moment we as South Asia doesn't have a regional market per se, even though it is the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission of India that says this Indian energy exchanges that they built basically to integrate and facilitate the transmission investment in their different 28 states altogether. And it is governed by CERC, which, as you correctly mentioned, it clearly mentions that certain conditions government could kick in that can veto certain kind of trades. So it is not a problem of India or any other particular country. It is about the lack of regional market we have at the moment. And there are World Bank group people and others that we know who are trying to work on it. And what we need is an architecture that is regional, away from, because we had been benefiting from what India has actually came up with. They have, for their own sake, they have came up with Indian Energy Exchange, and there are altogether 3 exchanges at the moment from which others are also benefiting by trading. Yeah. Even though the volumes are not great, I mean, it's a volume is significant for Nepal in terms of their economy. It's a significant amount of trading that happens. So that's why we need to move away from region and come up with some regional framework without keeping on benefiting from what India came up with for their own use.
Really helpful.
Very helpful. So I have, it says time's up, but I'm looking at my watch and it looks like we have 2 minutes left until
Don't trust the screen.
until 10:30. So, but I just want to ask each of the panelists to give us an elevator pitch. So that's like 30 seconds on what we need to do to enhance regulatory and policy framework for power trade in the Asia and Pacific region. So Stephen, let's start with you and give us an elevator pitch on what we need to do.
So I just emphasize to bear in mind that the types of trades, this kind of bidirectionality point that I was going to, that I made in the talk is going to really impact what we need in terms of market arrangements, but also the contracting and the financing arrangements, because often the financing arrangements are steered by kind of the idea of having like one direction and to undermine the bankability, to underpin the bankability of a project. So we need to be kind of innovative in those commercial arrangements as well as the market frameworks that we talked about earlier.
Rena?
So I think two things I would like to again highlight from what I've already talked about: innovative market mechanisms and the digital grid that we are looking. Where the will is there, and the grid needs to be prepared to be able to do the kind of transactions that the region is looking forward to, and of course, right policies and right political will is what you will be the great enabler in this kind of regional trade.
Roble?
2 points. One, participate in the review of technical standards that are being developed now. And you can come and get my card and I'll be happy to get you in touch with the right folks. And the second is, once those documents are reviewed, collect voices in subregions or in regions and express those as in the aggregate as opposed to individually.
All right, as mentioned, we have the architecture in place, we have the people in place, the will is in place. So I think what we really need to do is just take the plunge, take the first step in the right direction. Then we'll showcase, see what the benefits are, and things will snowball from there.
Yeah, I think we believe in economics. So where the value is there, the value is created in both parties, the transactions will take place. And what we need is, I think, in the fundamental ideological level, is to look at what are the hurdles. If a transaction doesn't take place, then we perhaps have not captured all the costs and benefits that are perceived, maybe imaginary. And I think regarding the technical and other nuts and bolts, those are pretty standard. Now we know how to financial modeling and how to do the economic interconnection, how to do system studies. That part is pretty standard across the world. So it is the soft connectivity that matters, and that quite significantly vary from each region to region and collection of countries. So all those peculiarities need to be looked into without an ideology. I think that is where the key, because we don't have to worry so much about the technical standards and finance. Those are pretty standard. So
That's great,
That's what I
Felipe.
believe.
Thanks for this. That sums it up very well, actually, that really these regulatory and policy frameworks, they're needed to overcome these barriers to transactions that can unlock the economic value of interconnectors, more renewable energy, resiliency, all these things that we talk about with the clean energy transition. So I love this session. This is great. Thank you so much to the panelists for the great presentation and discussion. Thank you for the audience for stepping up. We had lots of great questions. So let's just give a round of applause for everybody here.
And thank you to you for wonderfully moderating and keeping us on track with time.